Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Haxton. I'm the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine here in Kirksville, Missouri. I've been at that position since the year 2000, so 20 years of museum work. And during my time at the museum, a rather interesting artifact that has nothing to do with medical history came to the museum through one of our workers. And that story changed my life, and to this day is considered one of the 10 most haunted objects in the world. And it came to Kirksville, which is kind of an interesting thing in itself because, as many people know, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, 3 hours from the largest cities and somewhat isolated. Things are very traditional. Things don't change very much. So how would this unusual haunted artifact come to Kirksville? Why would it come to Kirksville? And what's the story of the Dibbuk Box? The Dibbuk Box story is so intriguing that it's been turned into a #1 Hollywood movie called The Possession. So this actually is frequently on Netflix and can be seen. Not only did it make a #1 movie for the nation and the world, bringing in millions of dollars, but it's been turned into over a dozen different cable network shows, the Travel Channel, Discovery, History 2, all kinds of shows have been done on the artifact called the Dibbuk Box. And we're going to learn more about the Dibbuk Box. Now, the story begins with me kind of minding my own business and working at the museum. And often we have Truman State University, which is our neighboring sister kind of campus. And we give opportunities. Our medical students use their libraries, their students use our libraries, job opportunities sometimes transfer between the campuses for work study. And it just so happens that one of these senior students was looking for some experience in museum work. He wanted to go on in his education for his master's after Truman and become a museum person. And so getting some job experience would be good. And so this young man, Brian Grubbs, I said, well, why don't you come over and do maybe 20 hours a week and we'll pay you and you'll get some good museum experience. And it worked out really well, except Brian is a little bit of a young student, and a lot of the museum staff is kind of older, and we've got families, and we've got pets, and we've got houses. And so when we'd sit around and talk about our lives, they didn't really relate to a young single college student. And we would talk about these various things, our historic homes and such. And Brian would kind of quietly sit and kind of eyes glazed over. And we just thought, it's good experience for him to learn what's coming. After a couple weeks, though, one day as we came to the end of our staff meeting, and I just said, well, does anybody else have anything to share? Brian all of a sudden got kind of, he goes, oh. He goes, I've got something to share. My roommate bought a haunted Jewish wine cabinet. And of course, what is a haunted Jewish wine cabinet? He goes, it's called a Dibbuk box. A Dibbuk is a spirit that attaches and kind of lives through you, kind of like schizophrenia. You've got your own spirit, and now you're sharing your body with another spirit that has nothing to do with you. It's like, that's kind of freaky. And of course, we all kind of looked at Brian. I think he realized suddenly that he had like too much attention, and he's like, no, I can show you. So we go to the internet. He shows us this little wooden box, and actually kind of attractive. But then when we read the story about the box, it becomes really weird. So if you want to know more of that aspect, you can go to the website www.dibbukbox.com. So dibbukbox.com. That will take you, and you can actually read the story in various languages: German, Russian, Portuguese, and English. And it has a lot of the background stories. And you can actually see the Dibbuk Box. So again, if you want a little bit more information, that'll be a place you can go. But let me share my PowerPoint and talk about this weird artifact. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a minute. And then we're going to make it full. There we go. So that is how you spell Dybbuk, Dibbukbox, and that is a Jewish word, first used maybe about 600 years ago, of when a spirit of a person has unfinished business. They die too young, maybe a suicide or an accidental death, but they're not prepared to die. They may have things that they want to do and cannot go on to the world of whatever comes next unless they finish things back home. Maybe there was an unfinished family argument or something, or some kind of abuse that needs to try to be remedied for that person could find peace in the afterlife. So that's kind of what a Dybbuk is. The word actually means cleaving spirit, as if it's attached to you. And certainly it's something you wouldn't want. Now, it is also considered a temporary thing. A Dybbuk doesn't take you over and live in you as a demon. It is only using your human body to finish its business on earth, and then it'll go away. So now at least you know what a Dybbuk is. And this is actually that little wooden wine cabinet. And it was full of these interesting familial tokens, granite carved woods with Hebrew, unusual little brass cups, octopus strange candlesticks, copper pennies from the 1920s, hair, both blonde and black, a rose. There were interesting things in this Dybbuk box. So here is our museum, and I was just, as I told you, minding my own business when Brian Grubbs, an intern from Truman State University, he's now works in museums and libraries down in Springfield, Missouri, as a family, doing very well. But at this time, he was just, again, an intern. And as he said, my roommate bought this strange wooden wine box that supposedly has a spirit. Now, what Brian and his roommate had been doing is that they lived together with about 5 other guys, and they were experimenting to find out, did this thing really have some kind of strange possession? Well, this the roommates and Brian and his friends would say there certainly was a lot of strange happenings, infestations of gnats and insects and stuff around their home, kind of like a plague. Um, Bleeding eyes, sickness, things exploding, all kinds of technical things being like almost overcharged and exploding, things breaking constantly. It really was kind of a plague on their apartment, and the students were very happy to get rid of it. So Brian tells me the way the story goes is that it was summertime and he was staying at the apartment alone. Of course, obviously, the rest of the roommates would come back in the fall. And there was one local roommate, and he doesn't like to be identified. He never wants to be associated with the Dybbuk box again, and I guess I can't blame him. But this local kid, whose parents worked at Truman University, was living in the apartment. And Brian said, well, if you want to just keep living through the summer and not pay rent, but maybe help with utilities and clean up, then you can just stay here because, I don't want to be left alone. And so this student kind of just stayed at the apartment. Well, he was on the internet, and you have to consider this was in 2003. And there wasn't a lot on haunted or his spooky items, but he come across this auction for this wooden wine cabinet that supposedly had a very dark past. And so he became curious about it and wanted to buy this. And so he asked Brian, would you chip in with me and we will buy this Dybbuk box and experiment with it? Well, Brian initially said, yeah, sure. But then later said, well, I don't have a lot of extra money. So if you want to buy it and have it here, that's fine. But I'm not going to be part of this situation. Well, the roommate did buy and win this auction of this strange artifact. But what Brian says, what was odd was it didn't arrive right away. It was really quite some time. And He and his roommate believed that he'd just gotten taken on the internet and that this haunted Jewish wine box was, a scam and was not going to come. One day, Brian went to his apartment a month or so later for lunch. And as he entered the house, he opened the door and there was this strange odor of urine. And it bothered him. He says, well, here I've let this guy stay with me and he can't even hit the toilet. And the place smells. I mean, I wanted this to be clean. Well, Brian goes to the bathroom and the urine smell isn't there. It's actually in the house. And he looks over and on the coffee table is the wooden Dibbuk box with a box and papers thrown around. It looked like his roommate opened it, set it up, and then must have had to go to class. And all of a sudden it reminds Brian the urine smell was one of those things that had to do with the story of this strange Dibbuk box. So he said then immediately the smell just went away. So that was his first kind of like, this isn't a good thing. Now let me backtrack a little bit. What his roommate had read on the internet was the story of this man who bought this thing. Now originally, he had an antique store, and so he would refurbish things, and this was in Portland, Oregon. And he would buy and refurbish antiques and make a little bit of living off these things. Well, he was going around to the various yard sales and auctions, and he came to this house in Portland, Oregon, and saw some nice things, some wooden trunks for ships used to use, and an old-fashioned sewing machine, and some nice old vases, and he sees this interesting little wooden box with this grape motif, the one that we showed you, the Dibbuk box. But at the time, he just thought it was an attractive little box. And so he picks it up and he's making his purchases. And as he's leaving the yard sale, one of the family members says, oh, I see you've bought Grandma's Dibbuk box. And Kevin Manis, who was the guy who bought it originally and had the antique shop, Kevin said, Dibbuk box, what's that? And the woman said, well, we don't really know. It was Grandma's and she kept it in her sewing room and we were never to touch it. And that's what she called it, was a Dibbuk box. And of course, Kevin was like, oh, I'm sorry. I assumed this was for sale in the yard sale. Here, take it back. And the woman was like, oh, no. You bought the Dibbuk box. It's yours. And he said, well, what's in it? He rattles it and she goes, I don't know. It had a little lock. We were never to open it or bother it. And Grandma was very sincere about this. So Kevin was like, well, should we open it and look? Said, no. Grandma didn't want us to open the box and it's yours. You need to take it and leave. And he goes, well, no. I didn't realize this had sentimental value. Here, just take it back. And it's like, no, you bought it. He goes, well, I don't want my money back. I mean, consider it an act of kindness. Just take it back. And then she started screaming, you made the deal. It's yours. You bought the Dibbuk box. We don't want you. We don't want it here. Well, Kevin was like, whoa, this is kind of a little aggressive, but you know how it is. I mean, someone passes in the family and now you're getting rid of their possessions. It can be a very stressful time. So Kevin's just interpreting this as just typical stress of loss of a grandparent selling their things. It's kind of, a difficult time. So he decides the best thing I can do is just take this box and leave. So he gets in his car and he goes back to his shop. And at his shop, he has some workers, and this young Asian worker, Jane, he says, he goes down in the basement with his box that he bought and the other things. He gets them unloaded and he opens up the lock. And when he opens the door, and he got this strange little hinge. When you pull the doors magically open on their own. If you push the doors shut. He goes, well, this is interesting. And inside it, he finds the hair, the granite stone, the Hebrew writing, the coins, all these strange things. So he kind of pulls the stuff out and thinks, I'll give it to the family. Um, I'll go back and give it back to the family because this is obviously very personal items of some type. So he empties out the box and he thinks, my mother's birthday is coming up. This would make a very nice gift for her. I'll just use a little bit of lemon oil to kind of, shine it up a little bit. And this door opening thing, she'll like that. So he leaves the stuff in a box that he pulled out of it, and he leaves the Dibbuk box itself on the workshop. And he goes upstairs and he tells Jane that I have a few errands to go through, and I'll be back in a little while. And he goes. Kevin says, I wasn't gone, but 5 or 10 minutes, and I received this phone call, and it's Jane. She says, Kevin, you've got to come back to the shop. And he goes, well, what's wrong? She goes, I've been locked in the shop. You see, the shop was in, like I said, Portland, Oregon on Burn Street, which is a very active street. So it had a gate to lock at night so that people couldn't break in. She says that somehow I've been locked in and someone's in the basement. I can hear them. They're making loud noises and things are breaking. I'm scared. And Kevin was just about to tell her to call the police and his phone went dead. So he rushes back to the shop, and sure enough, when he gets there, the gate is locked. So he unlocks the gate and he goes inside, and there in the office, Jane is crying and huddled and scared to death. As he goes to go downstairs, because there's only one way down to his workshop, there's no way out. He flips on the light, but there's no light. He comes back up to get a flashlight, and Jane runs out of the shop. She's gone, never to come back. He gets his flashlight and he goes down and he looks around, and suddenly he says there's a strange smell of piss, like cat. He goes, I've never had an animal. This has never smelled in our basement. He goes a few more steps and smell of jasmine, this sickly, perfumey smell. He goes, oh, this is strange. And when he gets down to the basement, he realizes what the crashing was. All the lights, the fluorescent lights, have been dropped onto the floor, and the incandescents, the bulbs, have been smashed right inside their sockets. So there's no light. All the bulbs are broken. And he looks around, and there's nobody there. And the shop had been locked. So he comes out and he's thinking, what happened here? He assumes that somebody locked the gate, and when Jane discovered she was locked in, she got upset. She went down to his workshop and trashed the place because she got locked in. That's the only explanation. So, of course, Jane would not come back and would not talk about what happened. And of course, he figured a disgruntled employee, good to be rid of her. So, the next week, it's his mom's birthday, Ida. And she often came and helped at the shop herself. So she comes to the shop, and Kevin is going to give her her gift, the wooden box, and then they're going to go out to lunch. So as she comes in, she sits in one of the comfy antique chairs, and he brings out the wooden gift. Now, he presents it to his mother and says that I'm going to make a few phone calls, and then we'll go out to lunch. What I heard later when I interviewed Ida about this, she said, as soon as I saw that thing, I knew it was dark and I knew it was bad. But your son is giving you a birthday gift. What do you tell him? Get that piece of crap out of my face. You're a mother. You accept the gift. So, even though I had a lot of apprehension, I thanked him for the birthday gift. As he left the room, I decided to open it. And as soon as I touched that wooden box, an energy came through me, a power, an electric energy. I didn't know where to run, what to do. It was so overpowering. We live near Mount St. Helens, and that volcano has gone off, and Unless you've ever been near a volcano when it goes off, you truly do not know the fear and power of such a thing. She goes, it felt just like that and more. And after touching it, the next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, and I couldn't speak, and I couldn't use one of my hands. Go back. So Kevin leaves his mother with the box, goes to make a phone call, and one of his workers comes in and says, Kevin, you got to come out, and there's something wrong with your mother. Kevin's like, well, I just left her with her birthday gift. What do you mean there's something wrong? He goes, something's really wrong with your mother. You got to come out here now. So Kevin goes out there, and there his mother is sitting in the chair, catatonic, eyes staring, and just tears rolling down her eyes. Well, he calls the ambulance, and they take her away, and of course he goes to join her. So when he gets to the hospital, the doctor says, now it appears your mother has had some kind of a seizure or stroke, and she's lost, basically she's paralyzed on one side of her body. Now, her short-term memory might be real fuzzy, but she should remember long-term things. She should know who you are and things like this, but she might not remember what's happened in the last day or two. Okay, so just so you know. So Kevin goes in to see his mom. He goes, and with patients that are paralyzed, we've learned that it's hard for them to communicate. So we've created an alphabet so that they can point to letters with their good side, and then you can communicate with her. So Kevin goes in, it's like, oh my gosh, and he holds up the piece of paper. He goes, do you want to tell me something? And with her good hand, she points out N-O, no, G-I-F-T, no gift. Now Kevin's thinking, she's just suffered this major issue and is in a hospital, and she's worried about her birthday gift? It's like, Mom, no. I gave you a gift. I gave you the nice little wooden box. She becomes very disgruntled. She starts pointing out on the paper again, H-A-T-E-G-I-F-T, hate gift. Now again, Kevin's, why is she worried about a birthday gift? She's in critical condition. And it's like, Ma, forget about the birthday gift. If you don't like it, I'm sorry you don't like it. I'll get you something else. Just get better. But he didn't understand, why is her obsession with her birthday and gifts when she's, suffering health-wise? Well, of course, what Ida was trying to do was warn him about that thing. So Kevin leaves and he goes back to the shop. And while he's at the shop, he decides, well, Mom doesn't want this birthday gift, so he just basically puts it in his shop to sell. He goes, a middle-aged couple comes in, and they come over to the box and they buy it. And he's thinking, okay, and no big deal. The box is gone. I'll use the money and get Mom something else. He goes, I come back to the shop the next night. Remember, we keep gates on because this is kind of a sketchy area. Nothing unlocked stays very long. And as he gets to his gate, there is the wooden Dibbuk box with a note on it. And the note says, this has a dark presence. So obviously the couple had returned it and nobody had stolen it, just sat there. So he takes off the note and he puts it back in his shop, and he thought, well, I'll sell it again. And from the other day when his mother had her incident, one of the paramedics came back. He says, I didn't realize you had this little antique shop, and I hope your mom's doing better. He goes, well, she's getting through it. He goes, well, I just wanted to look around. And Kevin's like, well, yeah, I mean, give you a good price. And he said, instantly, the man looked at the Dibbuk box and started moving that way. He goes, and I've been in the business long enough that I know when I've made a sale. You can tell when somebody wants something really bad. And I could tell that he really liked that. So I thought, here it goes. I'm going to sell this. He goes, he gets right up to the Dibbuk box and he almost touches it and he pulls his hand back. And he gets this look of fear in his face. And he just suddenly walks back away. And Kevin thought, now that's strange. And he leaves the shop, doesn't say anything else. So Kevin decides, well, maybe I should take this out of the shop. And he takes it home, and it's at his house for a while. And he starts having these really strange dreams. Dreams that he's out on a walk with a friend, and they're chit-chatting, nothing special. But as they're walking, he looks at their eyes and he realizes that it's not their friend. And the person becomes this demonic hag and starts beating and wailing. And he goes, I wake up bruised. He goes, I thought I was going crazy. Anyway, um, my brother and sister-in-law had come over, and they saw the Dibbuk box and asked about it. I said, well, I gave it to mom, but mom didn't like it. And she thought, well, it's rather pretty. And he showed her how it worked. He goes, oh my goodness, that's interesting. You pull the drawer and the door's open. And it's like, well, can we have it? And he's like, sure, just take it. And the box went home with his brother and sister-in-law. And about 2 or 3 days later, his brother calls him up and says, hey, I'm going to drop that wooden box back off at your house. It's not working out. Kevin was like, what do you mean it's not working out? It's like, well, it's got this really strange smell, like really cheap perfume. It's like, my wife says it smells like piss. And she doesn't want it in the house. She says it stinks. I agree. It doesn't smell right. And so we're just going to let you have it back. So I was like, okay. So they drop it off. And Kevin's girlfriend comes over, and they're chit-chatting, and he's telling her this strange story of this. Nobody seems to like this box. I gave it to mom. She didn't want it. I've sold it. He didn't want it. Other customers, they look at it, but then they go away. And gave it to my brother, and he says it stinks. Of course, Carmen, she goes, it doesn't stink. Doesn't smell like anything. He goes, well, that's what I thought, And she goes, well, I'll take it. He says, okay, you can have it. So Carmen takes it home. A couple of days later, Carmen comes back over and she brings the box. He goes, what's wrong? She goes, it's broken. It's like, what do you mean it's broken? He said, it won't stay shut. I put it on the shelf. I close it. In the morning, I wake up, doors are wide open. Put it back, close the door. I come back, doors are wide open. Thing's broken. I don't want it. Fine. So he takes the Dibbuk box back. Well, his brother and sister-in-law come over for dinner, and they're having wine in a late night and enjoying conversation and stuff. And it gets really late, and Kevin says, you've been drinking. It's been late. Why don't you just spend the night in the guest room, and, you can go home in the morning. I don't want you drinking and driving. So, why don't you just stay here? No, that's fine. Well, in the morning, Kevin's fixing breakfast. He goes, how'd you guys sleep? It's like, oh, terrible. It's like, terrible. He goes, oh yeah, I just had these bad dreams all night. It's like, really? Yeah, he goes, dreamed that I was with a friend, and suddenly, I mean, you're gonna think this is crazy, but suddenly they just become this monster and just start beating me. And Kevin's like, what? He goes, yeah, that's a dream I had. He goes, I've had this dream before. And his wife says, well, I've never told you, but I've had that dream. And Kevin's like, wait a minute. I've had that dream, and I've had that dream a lot. And suddenly they said, well, the only time we've had the dream is when we're around that box. So they said, well, Carmen had the box. Why don't we call Carmen and just find out if she's ever had anything happen? So Kevin and his brother, Jared, they call Carmen. And they, Carmen, yeah, we're just curious. Have you ever had any strange dreams of being hurt? She goes, well, I had a dream that somebody was attacking me, but it stopped. And no, I haven't had that dream for a while. Do you remember when you had that dream? She goes, I don't know. It's been a while. Did you have that dream when you had the broken box? She goes, yeah. How did you know? And now everything's coming together. Something's wrong with that box. Of course, Kevin's brother's like, we're leaving. Good luck. So Kevin starts seeing these shadowy figures and stuff. He goes, I'm at night trying to figure out what this thing is. I'm typing in demon. He goes, I kind of fell asleep. And all of a sudden, I'm woken by feeling like someone breathing hot breath on my neck. And I turn around only to see this shadowy thing lumbering away. And now I'm really freaking out. I take the box and I put it out in my shed, out of the house. Suddenly, the alarm goes off, the smoke alarm. So, of course, I go out there and there's nothing, there's no smoke or fire, but this strange smell of cat piss, just like I had smelled in my shop. And now I really realize this thing has got to go. So Kevin, he's afraid to destroy it because if I burn it or break it or do something, whatever's in it might stay at my house. I'm going to send it away. So he does the auction. And that's when Brian's roommate buys it. And all these same things, the smells, the stuff, start happening at their apartment. So Brian tells me about the Dibbuk Box. And he says what ends up happening is it's about, everything's going really wrong. And now the roommate's kind of going crazy. He's like, he's failing his classes and he's constantly acting like something shadowy is following. And he moves out and he's just living at other people's apartment. He goes, we came back after Thanksgiving and the box and he were gone. Because I'd asked Kevin, I said, you got me curious about this thing. I'd like to come over and see it. He goes, well, you can't. He goes, it's gone. My roommate, and it's gone. I thought, oh, too bad. I was just curious. Well, winter break comes and it's January. And Brian's back at work. He goes, guess what? He goes, I ran into my roommate and he's lost all of his hair and he's really a mess. He thinks it's the box and he wants to get rid of it. So if you want the box, you can have it. I said, I don't want the box. I want to see it. And certainly maybe at the apartment, I don't even necessarily want it here. He goes, that's impossible. My roommate has said that the only way he's going to let anybody have access to the box is if they're going to buy it. I said, well, I'm not going to buy it. And Brian says, and by the way, I've spent some time with it. And when it's in the room, I can't sleep. The door's open. There's something strange. He goes, trust me, there is something not right about this artifact. I said, well, I'm not going to take the risk. Now, it so happens I had a friend who's an illusionist. That's what we call a magician these days, illusionist. They create illusions. And he's wanted to do a haunted tour of Kirksville, where you go to different places where people have died. And we've, again, every town has strange deaths. And so I kind of heard about different accidents and deaths where people had died and kind of was showing around. So he was going to walk them to these sites of death. And then at the end of the walking tour, kind of like what you might get like, in New Orleans or something, one of these haunted ghost tours. Once you do the haunted tour of Kirksville, he would bring them back to his apartment and he would create a spiritual illusion. But he says, the problem is, why would there be a spirit at my house? And I said, well, if you had the Dibbuk Box, you would have a spirit. He goes, well, what's a Dibbuk Box? So everything I've told you up to this point, I tell Michael Callahan, the illusionist. And he's like, is it available? I mean, can we buy it? I said, well, if we buy it, what if it really has a spirit? He goes, all the better. I said, from your perspective, you're young, you don't have kids. I said, I don't want to mess with that. He says, I said, and it is for sale. He goes, really? I said, well, the guy's going to sell it. But I said, we can make one like it and just call it the Dibbuk Box. I mean, let's just, pretend. He goes, we can do that if we don't get the real thing. But he goes, I'd rather get the real thing. And if something goes wrong, I'll take it. I said, okay, yeah. So I bid on the box and I get the box. And so I don't touch it. It Brian brings it to me at the museum, and he's not very happy. But I never meet his roommate. He literally takes the check back to his room and he gives me a box and he goes, "I don't think this is a good idea." And so I said, "Well, whatever." But I don't open it until Michael Callahan can come over. And we then put it on the table. We put some black velvet off. We put basically rubber gloves on in case there's some contaminants. And we get a black light because black lights will show if there's any biological material, any flesh or blood or anything like that, spit. It'll glow in a black light. That's why you look at your hands under black light, you can see if there's germ and dirt and if they're clean. So he comes over and we prepare it and we start going all over this and we get the black light on and right away we see that that you can't see in natural light. There's a white glow. It's a dribble of wax. So this thing has actually been used, that the candlestick with a black candle, and it's actually dripped onto the box. Like someone accidentally putting it in might have dripped a little wax on. You couldn't see it unless it was under the black light. And so we're exploring and finding different things out about it. And then I decide to run my own little experiment. I take off the gloves and I put my hands on the Dibbuk box and I close my eyes. The weird thing is, it feels as if the box melts into like liquid. I open my eyes and my hands are sitting on it. I close my eyes and it feels like it's just whooshed away. This is fascinating. Suddenly, though, it feels as if someone has just stuck a knife in me and starts ripping. It is such pain that, I mean, I feel like I'm going to pass out. It is horrible pain out of nowhere. I can barely breathe. I shut the box. I turn it against the wall so it can't open on its own. I go out and I say, "Michael, I got to go home. We're done." And so I get in the car. I go home. And of course, back, kids have show and tell, homework, bath time, dinner. Kind of forget about the Dibbuk box. So I'm going to go to bed. All night long, I'm envisioning this hag. And she just becomes this electrical thing. And as soon as I wake up, I go to sleep and it starts all over again, all night long, get no rest. I wake in the morning and go in the bathroom to shave, and my wife steps in. She goes, "What's wrong with your eyes?" I was like, "What do you mean?" I look in the mirror and they're full of blood. She goes, "You have pink eye?" I said, "I don't know. I didn't sleep very well." She goes, "Well, use some of my eye drops in there and you got to clean that out." So I did. And eyes usually heal very quickly. These eyes, the damage, weeks and weeks. And people were so nervous about me having pink eye after after so many days. I decided to go see the ophthalmologist. And so, he looks at my eyes and goes, "Well, it looks like spontaneous drying. It looks like your eye ducts just stopped lubricating." I said, "Well, what causes that?" He goes, "Well, I don't know, but that's causing your bloodshot eyes." So I thought, well, that's the ophthalmologist. I go to the optometrist and same thing, only they put yellow drops in and they're looking at everything. It's like you've had a spontaneous drying of your eyes. You're going to have to use drops the rest of your life. And so, of course, the funny thing about it is that, that was in 2004. So here it is 16 years later. If I don't use the drops, then my eyes get really bloodshot after a day or two. So anyway, I just think that's weird. And then strange things again. I start choking, and I start seeing flashes of light, and I continue to have these bad dreams. And I'm trying to figure out what's happened. I think that it's not that there's a spirit in that box. And I got to thinking. I said, I know what's happened to everybody. Someone, either on purpose or accidentally, has coated the box with cyanide, strychnine. They've put poison on it. And I've touched it and touched my mouth or or it's just seeped through my skin. I said, touching the Dybbuk box with no gloves has actually poisoned me. And I went up and I looked up, if you look up, cyanide or strychnine poisoning, that's it. Bloody eyes, confusion, choking, hives, everything. I said, that's exactly what's happening to me. I poisoned myself. And that's what happened to everyone else. Well, I get out our kits because, that was actually a way of preserving things back in the past, is that you would basically coat things in cyanide. Keeps the bugs from eating it and preserves it. Beaver skin caps, like Lincoln used to wear these big tall caps. Well, the hatmen, the hatters, to make that beaver skin shine would actually use mercury, and they'd rub mercury on the beaver skin, and it would not only make it shine, but it would make it waterproof. But that mercury would leach into their system. It's a heavy metal, would go to the brain, and they would go crazy. Hence the term the Mad Hatter. When you see in Alice in Wonderland, the hat maker's crazy, it's because they have had leached material into their skin, such as mercury. So I'm thinking, I've become the Mad Hatter. I've poisoned myself. Well, again, we have test kits at the museum. So I get out the swab and stuff, and my son's a science major, so he's used to always doing chemical analyses. So we actually go through the process of putting some water on, absorbing some material, running it through a strainer, and basically testing the material. When we're done, there's no poison. The only thing is sugar. Sugar is one of the oldest varnishes. You see, sugar never decomposes, it never rots. So if you want a food that will last, hence, if you have a fallout shelter, you should probably have hard candies because they will never rot. 10 years, 20 years later. We actually had this at Truman campus. They had fallout shelters back during the nuclear warfare. And in Blanton Hall, they had drums. I mean, we're talking 200-pound drums full of hard candy. And this was from the 60s. Some of the staff that found it were eating it. It's still good. Again, honey doesn't rot. It eventually just turns into amber. And so anyway, so sugar was used as a coating because it was hard, it wouldn't decompose, and if it got messed up, you could just add another layer of sugar. You could actually melt it down. That's why sometimes antiques look like they're really shiny and sparkly. It's the sugar in the varnish. Anyway, there's nothing poisonous on the Dybbuk box. So now, why are all these things happening to me? So it's a puzzle, and I'm really worried about this thing. I go and visit with my mother-in-law, and usually for lunch, and sometimes my wife goes and sometimes she doesn't go. And while she's making lunch for me, and towards the end of my meal, she says, I'm worried. You've got this thing called the Dybbuk box at your home. Is my daughter or my grandchildren in danger? I'm thinking, what about me? But that's another study. In Sweden, they actually wondered, do mother-in-laws not like their son-in-laws? And the research pointed out it is true. It is not just these jokes about mother-in-laws that you always hear. It's based a little bit on fact. What the Swedes discovered is that there is genetic material in the daughter and the children, but the mother shares no genetic material with the husband. And the perception is that resources that could be spent on the daughter and the children would be wasted on somebody that's not genetically you. Therefore, that is the basis of why mother-in-laws don't like their son-in-laws. They are potential resources of the elderly. If they leave their inheritance to the daughter, the son-in-law will get some of that, and he's no genetic material. Anyway, that's the Swedish theory. So she doesn't ask how I am. She just asks about her daughter and the grandkids. Yeah, I understand why. How am I going to answer her? Look how long we've been talking about this. So finally, I just say, well, it's a little wooden box that a Jewish woman prayed to. And, you know, uh, there's no harm. There's nothing dangerous about it. I think I need to back up my story a little bit. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Of what did this old lady do with this Dibbuk box, and why did it end up in Kirksville? So, um, what I've done is I've gone back through the roommate owner of Brian and then through Kevin Manis, the first owner who bought it from the garage sale. I find Kevin, I said, Kevin, something is wrong with that box you bought. He said, I always knew someone would come back and call me on that. He goes, I was so happy to have it out of my life and everything has been fine. My mother is better. All things are back to normal now that it's gone and I don't want it back in my life. But I said, but what is this? So Kevin says, I'm going to go back to where I think I bought it and ask them. So the story that Kevin shares is that when I found the family and went back, what I was told was that the grandmother uh, basically was in um, Poland during the time of Hitler's growth in the 30s into power. And the Jews were very worried about what was happening in Germany and to Poland with it being taken over by Germany. So they were looking for any information. And so that Havilah was one of the Jewish women with her cousin Sophia. And Havilah and Sophia had taken to using the table with markings and a tumbler, a little glass cup, and it was giving them answers about themselves and what was going to happen. At first, this was kind of fun and games, but the more they did this, the spirit started becoming what they felt aggressive, sharing secrets that they had that they didn't necessarily want others to know. And so it made them very nervous. So they decided what they were going to do was, with the help of Azadi, which is a religious leader, capture this spirit that he said was a Dybbuk. Well, on the night that they go to try to capture and eliminate the spirit, it goes very wrong, according to Sophia and Havilah. That very night, which is November 9th, 10th, 1938, the Jews are attacked by the Germans in what's called Kristallnacht. Now, there are always programs. They come and they basically stir things up, and then things go back to normal for a while. But on this night, they burn down all the synagogues, like 800, and thousands of businesses. The windows are all smashed, and it's at midnight, and then in the moon, the crystals glow in the streets, and that's why it's called Kristallnacht. The nights of crystal is the broken glass of the shops, and it's the first time that Jews are rounded up and put in concentration camps. 33,000 are actually taken to a concentration camp. This has never happened, and this is in 1938. So what the Jews are told is, you need to go. And it's like, well, where can we go? It's like, it's not our problem. You need to go. And so some of the Jews sold whatever they had. They knew they had to get out of the area. It was becoming dangerous. And they decided to take a cruise ship, kind of like Carnival Cruise Line, only it's a German luxury liner called the SS St. Louis, German luxury liner. They're going to let the Jews pay for passage, and they're going to take them not to America, to Cuba. They can't get into America. The Jews are blocked. So they spend all their money to get on this ship to come and possibly apply for refugee or immigration into the United States. And that's where my mother-in-law, after I tell her that it's just a little prayer box and nothing's going to happen, she goes, I remember. I was very young in St. Louis, but I remember about the ship. And I'm thinking, there's no ship in my story. She goes, My father would talk to his boss, a Jewish mercantile man, and every day he said they suffer so they can't get off the ship. And about that time behind me, the chandelier loosens, crashes onto the table, breaks plates and glasses, spoons and cutlery are flying over my head. It's like, what's just happened? My father-in-law comes in. What's going on in here? He picks up the chandelier. It's unbroken, but has destroyed and dented the table. I go back to my office thinking, does this have anything to do with the Dibbuk box? I type in basically ship Jews, and I get up the SS St. Louis, the ship of the damned. That because of immigration reform laws, that the ship could not come to America and goes to Cuba. And the Cubans don't want the Jews because they're not tourists, they're refugees, and they want more money, but the Jews have no more money. And the Germans don't know what to do. They can't really bring them back. So they're sitting out in the harbor. And after weeks, one of the Jews jumps overboard and the Cubans come and they get him back on the ship and they put, you got to go. They plead to come to Florida. And a man by the name of Laughlin basically says that, no, we don't, Harry Hamilton Laughlin, we don't want these Jews. They're the dregs of society. And the Coast Guard follows the ship back to Europe. They're released in Belgium and France, which are taken over very quickly by the German, and almost all 1,000 of those passengers on the ship of the damned are killed. Only a handful survive to tell the story of what happened to them. And I'm wondering, could this Laughlin have anything to do with Laughlin's of Kirksville? I mean, a very prominent family in both Truman University and the school system. Well, getting back to the story, after they try to capture the spirit and Kristallnacht happens, and the families, the children, the grandparents, they're all captured and killed. Havila and Sophia escape to Spain. They are somehow able to get away, and they come to Portland, Oregon. When the war is over, they feel that something they did, it's not that the program wouldn't have happened, but it happened in a way it had never happened before, and they thought this had something to do with this crazy spirit. And so Havila decides to recreate a box and capture the spirit that she feels is out there. And she wants to understand why 6 million Jews died, and millions of other people too, but why? What caused this? She prays, this is in the 1950s, she prays every day to this wooden box for an answer. Why did so many people die? And nobody in her family was to touch the Dibbuk box, and she kept granite stones and hair and tokens and energy producing pieces. And she talked to God through her Dibbuk box. She lived to be 103, perfect health. She told her family, when I die, bury the box with me. She catches pneumonia, very quick death, dies in a week. The family takes the Dibbuk box to the rabbi. Says, this is grandmother's special prayer box, and she wants it buried with her. The rabbi's like, what? We don't have any prayer boxes. Well, I know, but it was something that comforted her from after the war, and she would like it buried with her. The rabbi's like, we're not going to bury that with her. It looks like a nice little box. Give it to somebody. Get some use. It will do her no good. What we believe, this box will do her no good in her grave. This sounds like the Egyptians. They buried coffins and people and tools for the afterlife. We were their slaves. We're not going to do what the Egyptians did. Bury things with her? No. You want her buried? No Dibbuk box. Give it to somebody. It's all done. We're not going to talk about this. So once the rabbi spoke, that box was not going to go in with grandma. Now, had it, none of this would have happened. So after grandma's buried, the family doesn't know what to do with this box. So they decide to sell her things in a garage sale. And that's how Kevin gets it. And when Kevin goes back to them and says, "Ah, why didn't you tell me about this thing?" He's like, well, we don't know. We didn't know. He goes, well, you realize that this box is causing havoc in all kinds of people's lives. Mine, college kid, the guy who has it now. They said, we suspected that the Dibbuk box is like a clock that's been wound up, and it's going to keep going until it answers her prayer. And he said, well, what was her prayer? What caused the Holocaust? Hitler, crazy man. Something small became something big. The Dibbuk Box job was to tell her, Havilah, what was the little seed that grew into the bigger thing that caused this? That there was something very small that started it. Kind of like a rock rolling down a hill, gathering its speed, and pretty soon it's an avalanche. What was the little stone that started it? The box has gone to answer the question. So Kevin tells me this. I said, Kevin, I said, we're in Kirksville, Missouri. There's no Jews. There's no synagogue. We had nothing to do with the Holocaust. The box has made a major mistake. He says, that's what the family says. The box has gone to give the answer, and the answer is in Kirksville. I said, that's ridiculous. And then I look up the ship of the dam, and I see the name Harry Hamilton Laughlin refuses those passengers. And I'm thinking, there is no way this man can be the Laughlins of Kirksville. And he is. You see, the Laughlins come from Appaloosa County up in Iowa. And George Sr., the dad, was a preacher and educated. He knew all the Romantic languages, Greek, Latin, and could teach those languages. He first becomes the principal and the superintendent at the Kirksville High School. And then he goes to Truman University and he becomes the professor of the Romantic languages. His children also are all educated and go, and Harry becomes the principal at the high school, becomes the superintendent, and then he is offered the job of animal husbandry, breeding animals at Truman University. He's seen that you can breed animals, and when you're breeding high stock, you've got to get rid of 10% of the stock. So if you've got 10 chicks, you find the mutant, the weak one, and you kill it. You think if I just keep them all, I'm making money. But he goes, that weak one will infiltrate the rest of your stock and it'll make it mediocre. If you want the best chickens, you have to find the weak ones and you have to get rid of them. And it typically is about 10%. He does all this research, and his chickens are amazing. And they're the best in the area. He writes down his research and sends it to Charles Davenport. He is head of the eugenics movement in America in the 19-teens in Cold Spring Harbor, New York. He sees the work of this prominent young professor of Kirksville, Harry Hamilton Laughlin, and he says, I want this young man as my assistant. He brings Harry to New York. Harry starts his PhD in the schools there, and he starts doing research. He just changes his chicken research to human research. And he looks up that there are certain countries where people are basically inferior and dullard and bad breeding stock compared to the Northern Europeans that are good breeding stock. And so he does this research and he starts sending it to Congress through the Carnegie Foundation and stuff, of that we need to enact laws to protect the vibrancy of the pioneer frontier person. We need to sterilize. You're not going to kill. I mean, you do that to animals. Humans sterilize 10% of the population. That these are people that are not fit for breeding. Maybe they have poor eyesight or hearing or mixed race blood or just dumb or epileptic or addicted. All these various things, they passed laws in the 1924 to basically that you have no right. The sterilization laws of the United States in the 1920s. By 1929, 31 states have enacted sterilization laws. He also goes for immigration restriction. We've been letting all these people come into the United States. We think this is something today we're talking about. Back in the 1920s, we've let all these people in. We need to be a little more careful. So basically, the immigration restriction law says that we will only, from 350, 80,000 people, almost 500,000 people a year, to fewer than 25,000 and no Jews. So you see, when the Jews get on the SS St. Louis, they can't come to the United States because we have these laws of immigration restriction and Jews are not permitted. They have to go to Cuba and apply to become immigrants. And Harry says we don't want them. During the war, 20,000 Jewish children, there's a consortium of Jewish leadership who says, we want to bring 20,000 Jewish children to the United States. And if you let us bring them, we will not even ask for any immigration for 5 years. If you'll just take the children. I don't think it ever happened. So, immigration restriction, sterilization, and marriage restriction laws. These are all laws created by Harry Hamilton Laughlin that are passed by the Congress and basically become American laws. Now, he's looking to Hitler. Hitler was a war hero in World War I, meaning you get your own bar. Now, a bar there is not like a bar here in town where we maybe get 100 or 200 people. Bar in Germany, in Nuremberg or Munich, you might have 5,000 to 8,000 people because they're on levels and there's restaurants and they're massive. The Hofbrauhaus, as an example I've been to, it just keeps going. It's huge. Anyway, Hitler gets one of these bars. After the war, double-digit inflation, things are going to heck, everybody's upset with their government. Hitler decrees we need to take back the government for the people. And he's speaking at the bar and everybody's like, yeah, Hitler, yeah, everything's great. He goes, tomorrow we march and we take back our government. So in the morning, when Hitler's ready to go and march and take back the government, everybody's gone, sleeping it off. Now, there's a couple hundred that are still there, but they're probably the dregs. And they're like, yeah, let's go, Hitler. And you think, whatever. He takes his 200 and he marches. Well, it's a joke. The officers shoot and kill 8 of them. Hitler's blamed for their death for invoking a riot. And he's sent to jail for 8 years. Hitler goes to jail and he's in jail. He decides to start writing his book, Mein Kampf, My People, My Struggle. And as he's in jail, he's thinking, revolution with 200 drunks? Bad idea. He looks to the United States. He goes, now, the United States is becoming a national government with their marriage restriction, sterilization, immigration restriction. We need to incorporate these kinds of ideals in Germany. Now, he's only to be held 6 months and he can appeal for release. 8-year conviction, but he can appeal for release in 6 months. His book isn't done, so he stays 8 months. Once his book is done, Mein Kampf, he is released from jail and starts his political career based on the national laws that we have set up here. Now, within the first year when he comes into power, they sterilize like 360 some thousand people in 1 year. Harry in the United States says, we've only sterilized 60 or 70,000. We have come up with these laws and Hitler is beating us at our game. These are our laws. He's showing us how it's done. This is in the Eugenics magazine in the 1929, 30, 31. Hitler takes over all the American laws, and the American laws of the 20s become the Nuremberg laws of the 30s. Sterilization, immigration restriction, and marriage. And these laws are used to basically defeat and destroy the Jews. Now, in the United States, we look to see what's going on and we're horrified. And not only that, we realize that the research that Harry did to come up with these laws, they were done with people who either didn't speak the language or had mental issues. It was bogus research. And so now we're stuck with this person, now the director of the eugenics movement, and he's very powerful. Hitler is so pleased with Harry's work, he gives him an honorary medical degree from Heidelberg, 1936. It's here at the library at Truman University, along with all the papers and his research. Harry knows that things are getting kind of tough between America and Germany. He goes, I would love to come and accept my degree, but how about you just mail it to me? And they do. Now Hitler creates a movie, talks about the Jewish wrath, the degeneracy of the Jews, but it's all in German. Harry, in 1938, takes that film and basically has it translated to English and starts showing it at the high schools and the church groups. Now the government says, oh my gosh, is he anti-Semitic? What are we going to do? They decide because of the war on the horizon, they can defund the eugenics program. 75% of their money gone. They only get 1/4 of their money. Well, Harry's like, I can't run this program on this kind of money. He's at an age he decides to retire, packs up his stuff, all of his research in a railroad car, comes back to Kirksville, builds his mansion, which is still on Normal Street. And before he can move in and enjoy his mansion, he becomes a latent epileptic. He is the very white trash that he said to be sterilized based on American laws that he created or helped research and create. He should be taken off to the hospital, sterilized so he can't have any children. All of his friends from the eugenics movement, they'll have nothing to do with him. He lays and he suffers. We don't know what's wrong with him, but he's in great pain and he's suffering. This goes on all the way till January of 1943. And then he has a massive heart attack and dies after 2.5 years of suffering, and nobody knows what's wrong with him. War goes on. Millions die. Harry's forgotten. He's buried out at Highland Park near George Laughlin, behind that grave, unmarked, with just the letters, forgotten. When the war ends, we have to have justice in Europe. The Americans win the war, so we go and we have the trials, and we have it in Nuremberg. Nuremberg was the capital that Hitler was going to bring all the countries, and it was going to be kind of like where everybody came to discuss the world that he was going to run. It was never finished, but that was the ideal. Nuremberg was going to be the capital of the world. So when the war ends, we go to Nuremberg and we have the trials. Now there's so many people. We can't try them one at a time. We bring them in groups, and they must come up with their own defense, one defense for everybody, and then they're tried. And, basically the SS and the Nazis, and they bring in the lawyers and judges. And they said, okay, come up with your defense. You realize your laws that you enforced harmed, killed, did great damage to the Jewish people. What is your defense? And it's written down in the Nuremberg trials. The lawyers and judges got together and said, our defense is a greater nation did this first. The greater nation won the war. Without saying it, they said, America, the United States, did this first. Well, what were we to do? Most got a year probation, and it was forgotten. People don't realize the Nuremberg laws are verbatim American laws. You can Google Hitler, Laughlin, and it's all there. It's a dark secret that was forgotten. So, is this the little thing that became the big thing? A man from Kirksville who bred animals, chickens, who couldn't tell the difference between a chicken and a person. and transferred those ideas to the most powerful person in Europe at the time, who then exploited those ideas in a grand scale. Once this was discovered, all the problems of the Dybbuk box stopped. It was as if the prayer had been answered. What was the small thing that started the avalanche? And very likely, at least from this prayer perspective, it was that. So now here's the question. What was the spirit in the box that now is relaxed? The spirit could have been Harry Laughlin. Remember, when the mother gets it as a gift and touches it, she suffers a heart attack, the very thing that killed Harry. Now, after they get rid of the box, she completely recovers. Paralysis, talking, everything is back to normal in that family. But here's the thing. Harry died and nobody remembered him. Was shining the light on himself through the Dybbuk box and the story that became a movie. Was he then able to have penance and get back into a comfort place of afterlife? Could the Dybbuk be the old lady? She answered her own prayer. Who knows? But as I'm saying, it was a wish box. So after this was done, I never had any of my ailments again. Everything went back to normal. And I was no longer fearful of this thing, understanding it. And so I gave the Dybbuk box to a museum of artifacts, which is in Las Vegas. Zak Bagans is one of the greatest paranormal researchers, and he created a museum. And this is where the Dybbuk box is today and taken care of. And anybody can have access. See, that was my idea, is everybody wanted access. You know, yesterday I got a phone call, somebody still wanted to see it. It's like, well, you have to go to Las Vegas. But that was the whole idea, was to put it somewhere where anyone who has a curiosity about this thing, is it real? I don't know, but let me show you a few more pictures about the Dybbuk box. This is the shop. That's Kevin Manis, who bought it from the family, and you can see the iron gate to the shop that was locked when Jane heard all the breaking glass down in the basement. So there's Kevin, and the shop door's open. There's his mother, after she recovered from touching the Dybbuk box, but initially that's Ida, and it was given to her as a gift. And as she said, she knew instantly something was wrong with that birthday gift. The day that the Dybbuk box arrived in Kirksville and I was making fun of it, a tree crashed into my home. Thank goodness the neighbors had backhoes and pulled it off. But you see those little white dots? Someone else took this picture. It wasn't raining. Someone says those are orbs. I don't know. That's the paranormal world. But something had happened with that 100-year-old tree crashing into my home. What I was told is, after we had discovered what the Dybbuk was, to control it, put it in holy wood, which is called acacia. The Ark of the Covenant that held the 10 Commandments, the broken ones, that is what the wood grows so slow and so tight in the Middle East that it's impenetrable. It's like lead. Line it in gold and it will diffuse the Dybbuk box. We had the Amish help make this because it was such a difficult wood to work with. This is the case with gold, 24 karat gold, Hollywood paid for, and the Dybbuk box inside of it. The idea was that the wood is holy and gold is something holy to God, and so it would contain the energy. Now, a scientist would say that what's happening is an electromagnetic field. That brass cup, those granite has energy, everything on all those things in there are basically a mixture of energy, and that's what is causing people illness, like radiation to some degree. If we ground it with gold, it will stop the electromagnetic. So the scientists are saying it's electromagnetic. The Jews are saying it's spiritual. I don't care. They both said to do the same thing. Put it in a box of gold and it'll stop. And it did. And so that is how the Dybbuk box is housed. A prayer on the back. basically a protection. It is in a case so that it could be buried. So the Dybbuk box caught the attention of Hollywood, and they wanted to make this into a movie. And so here my wife and I are on the red carpet with the actors. Again, as I told you, it was a #1 movie making millions of dollars, and it was quite an experience to walk on the red carpet and to get to meet Kevin Bacon's wife, Kyra Sedgwick, if you've ever seen The Closer, and she's done a lot of other. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, he's famous from a lot of movies. If you like Grey's Anatomy, he was Denny Duquesne, but he's been in the Supernatural, the Winchester's brothers, that's their dad. I mean, so again, it was kind of fun to kind of hang out with the different movie stars and meet them, and they're really nice people. And of course, when you have a #1 movie, it makes them worth a lot more, so they're very happy. Um, to the left here is Sam Raimi. He's produced the Spider-Man series. So if you like the original Spider-Man or the new Wizard of Oz or all kinds, if you like horror movie, he did Grudge, the black-haired Asian one, or Evil Dead, the American one. He'd done American horror, Jewish horror, or American horror, Japanese horror, and he thought my story would be good Jewish horror. Old Bernadal is to the right. He was the director that basically directed the film, and it gave it kind of a creepiness as a result. Of course, again, me with my wife at the screening and the red carpet. And now Zak Bagans and Aaron Goodwin, they had a new haunted museum in Las Vegas. Again, one of many shows, again, various shows that it's been on, Sci-Fi, Travel Channel, Discovery, H2, History H2. If you just about name it, it's been on some kind of cable. So you'll see me often on these channel shows. They are now the caretakers of it. This just shows you the number of books, television shows, and conferences that have all tied into the Dybbuk box. And so what we have then, as I said, and here's a picture of it again, it is considered one of the most scary items of the world with a true story. Now, believe it or don't believe it, maybe all of this was coincidence, but it is out of my life. It is not my worry. Hopefully, it helps us look at what we did in when we treat people badly because of health issues or because of their nationality. You know, when we look at immigration or marriage restriction or sterilization, if nothing else, maybe we've learned a lesson from the past or can go back and revisit it. But that really is the true story of the Dybbuk box. If you watch the movie, there are some of the elements I told you in it, but it's Hollywood. They use a very light frame and then they do whatever they want. But it is a fascinating story. And I hope you've enjoyed our talk about the Dybbuk box and why it may have come to Kirksville. Thanks. And that's our program.